Hello, students. We are starting a new novel, The Princess and the Goblin. Now, some of the language in this can be a little bit older because it was written, let me see, I think in 1960. Let me look at it was copyrighted in 2010, but it was written in 1872. Whoa, like 150 years ago plus. Long time ago. Languages have changed. Our English language has changed since then. There are lots of old phrases, old words that we don't use as much anymore. But we can still talk about that as we go through the chapters and discuss what the real meaning is. So I'm going to read chapters 1 and 2 today because they're both really short. And it is, chapter 1 is called Why the Princess Has a Story About Her. And chapter 2 is The Princess Loses Herself. So the first two chapters are only 10 pages. So it's really not that long for today. And some days I'm going to do one chapter, some days two, because some of these chapters are like 20 pages and other ones are 4. And so it's just going to be a little random. So you're going to have to really pay attention to the owl and just follow along with the plan that I have set. Also, the fun thing about this chapter is you're going to be getting something. This is not the exact one, but it looks like this. Okay, yours is going to say April, May, and June because we're going to be reading this book from the end of April to the first week in June when which is our last week in school. And each day you're going to look and see, okay, today is Monday, April 27th. What's the activity I'm going to do today? And it might say something like, write a poem and draw a picture. I may send, with some things you're going to need a template to do. Like if I say do a comic strip, I'll send your parents a comic strip template so that you can print it off and create it. Or if you want, you can create your own comic strip on a plain piece of paper. It's up to you. But the first thing I'm going to have you do today is fill out this multiple intelligence quiz. So what you're going to do is you're going to fold it. Okay, you're going to fold the quiz on the little fold line. Okay, and then you're going to go through and answer these questions. So it says, the first question is, I find myself singing or humming many times during the day. If you're like, no, I never do that. Never. That would be a 0. If you're like, I do that literally all day, you'd probably be a 5. If you're like, sometimes, kind of like just randomly, then maybe you'd be a 2, 3, or 4. You get to decide between a 0 and 5. 0, never, or not at all, and 5 is very true. Happens all the time. Okay, you're going to go through this whole thing answering between 0 and 5. And then when you're done, you open this up and you mark. So like for number 1, it says, I find myself singing or humming many times during the day. If you did, it says, add the numbers in each column to find the total score for each multiple intelligence area. The highest possible score in each area is 15. What are your top strengths and areas for growth? So you're going to be doing this and figuring out, okay, I am definitely like musically gifted, right? So my strengths are musical, rhythmical, right? Or like, man, I really struggle with verbal linguistic. That's one thing I really struggle with. And so doing this calendar that I have set out for you every day is going to be a focus on a different multiple intelligence. There are 7 different multiple intelligences. So like naturalist would be someone who loves being outdoors, right? And you have to remember that we're not all just one thing. We're all a little bit of everything. But some of us are like really, really high in mathematical, logical, and some of us are really, really high in interpersonal, and others are really, really low in some things, right? You have strengths and weaknesses. We all do. But so each of the different things are, so naturalist, you love being outdoors, right? Which is probably most of you guys. Mathematical, logical, you love like puzzles and problem solving and math and probably grammar, anything that really you have to problem solve to do, right? Verbal linguistic. You like talking, you like writing, poems, journaling, any of that kind of stuff that you get to use your language for is a strength in that area. Musical rhythmical, right? You like writing poetry, you like singing songs, you like music, you like humming all day. Things like that means that you're musical rhythmical, or if you play an instrument. Visual spatial means you really enjoy art, right? It could be sculptures, it could be drawing, it could be painting, it could be looking at art. Maybe you're not great at doing art, but you love looking at art and deciding what different colors mean, or what the author or the artist was trying to portray in that picture. That could still be a very high visual spatial intelligence. Bodily kinesthetic, which is probably all of you. I think most kids are bodily kinesthetic, but bodily kinesthetic would be you just like to move, hands-on activities, all of that kind of stuff. Then there's interpersonal and intrapersonal. One of them is you like communicating with people like face to face. You love talking to people. You're a people person, right? Being around people just fills you up, makes you happy. And the other one is I really like to spend time by myself, right? I love to journal. I like to think about my own thoughts. I don't have to bounce ideas off of other people to process. You just kind of like your alone time, right? So there's all sorts of intelligences. And remember, we're all a little bit of all of these. If you're like, man, I really hope that I'm like 100% bodily kinesthetic, it doesn't really matter. You're going to be a little bit of everything, right? And you don't have to decide, I don't want to be mathematical, logical, gross. I want to have zeros on those. You're probably, if you're really being honest about this quiz, you're going to have some in everything, right? But you're going to have some strengths and some weaknesses. So the point of this calendar is to give you guys opportunities to do a little bit of everything, right? The first thing that you're going to do is, or one of the first things is write a poem and draw a picture. Some of you are probably hearing this going, oh, poem, blah, that's the worst. Maybe that's not your strength. And some of you are like, yes, I love writing poems. That sounds so fun. We did some poems in class. We did a haiku, we did a concrete poem, we did a cinquain poem. Any of those kind of things would be fine for this. And then draw a picture, go along with it, right? That could be linguistic and visual spatial. Some of these things kind of mesh together and go through several different intelligences, right? Because poetry could also be musical rhythmical, because there's a rhythm that goes to it with a lot of poems. So every day is going to be a different intelligence and a different activity. It's hands-on. It should be fun, sometimes challenging if it's not one of your strengths. But I hope you enjoy it because it's a little bit different. It's not worksheets. It's not answering questions. It's not complete sentences, which I know is torture for some of you, probably the ones who are not verbal linguistic strengths. And it's just something fun to end the year on with a fun book. So with all that to say, I'm going to get started on the first two chapters of The Princess and the Goblin. And do not let the title fool you. This is not a girly book, okay? This is full of wars and battles and fighting and all sorts of stuff. And a little romance if you like that kind of thing. All right, let's see. Chapter 1. Why the Princess Has a Story About Her. There was once a little princess whose father was king over a great country full of mountains and valleys. His palace was built upon one of the mountains and was very grand and beautiful. The princess, whose name was Irene, was born there, but she was sent soon after her birth because her mother was not very strong, to be brought up by a country people in a large house, half castle, half farmhouse, on the side of another mountain, about halfway between its base and its peak. So the base of a mountain and the peak of a mountain, it was about halfway. The princess was a sweet little creature, and at the time my story begins was about 8 years old. So your age, really. Or I guess a little younger. But she got older very fast. Her face was fair and pretty, with eyes like two bits of night sky, each with a star dissolved in the blue. Those eyes, you would have thought, must have known they came from there, so often were they turned up in that direction. The ceiling of her nursery was blue with stars in it, as like the sky as they could make it. but I doubt if ever she saw the real sky with stars in it, for a reason which I had better mention at once. These mountains were full of hollow places underneath, huge caverns and winding ways, some with water running through them, and some shining with all colors of the rainbow with a light when a light was taken in. There would not have been much known about them had there not been mines there, great, deep pits, with long galleries and passages running off from them, which had been dug to get at the ore of which the mountains were full. In the course of digging, the miners came upon many of these natural caverns. A few of them had far-off openings out on the side of a mountain or into a ravine. Now in these subterranean caverns lived a strange race of beings, called by some gnomes, by some kobolds, by some goblins. There was a legend current in the country that at one time they lived above ground and were very like other people, but for some reason or other, concerning which there were different legendary theories, the king had laid what they thought too severe taxes upon them, or required observances of them they did not like, or had begun to treat them with more severity in some way or other, and to impose stricter laws, and the consequence was that they had all disappeared from the face of the country. So they think, well, maybe the king got too harsh for them, and they decided, you know what, forget it. We're going to do our own thing, and they moved into the caves. According to the legend, however, instead of going to some other country, they had all taken refuge in the subterranean caverns, whence they never came out but at night, and then seldom showed themselves in any numbers, and never too many people at once. It was only in the least frequented and most difficult parts of the mountains that they were said to gather, even at night in the open air. So they didn't come out except in places that were hard to get to by other people. Those who had caught sight of them, of any of them, said that they had greatly altered in the course of generations, and no wonder, seeing they lived away from the sun in cold and wet and dark places. They were now not ordinarily ugly, but either absolutely hideous or ludicrously grotesque, both in face and form. There was no invention, they said, of the most lawless imagination expressed by pen or pencil that could surpass the extravagance of their appearance. So they're saying they were so hideous, so disgusting, that you could not even describe it with a pen and pencil. As they grew misshapen by body, they had grown in knowledge and cleverness, and now were able to do things no mortal could see the possibility of. But as they grew in cunning, like in intelligence, they grew in mischief, and their great delight was in every way they could think of to annoy the people who lived in the open air story above them. They had enough of affection left for them. They had enough of affection left for each other to preserve them from being absolutely cruel for cruelty's sake to those that came in their way. But still, they so heartily cherished the ancestral grudge against those who occupied their former possession, and especially against the descendants of the king who had caused their expulsion, that they sought every opportunity of tormenting them in ways that were as odd as their inventors. And although dwarfed and misshapen, they had strength equal to their cunning. So they were very strong and very smart, but also mischievous. And they loved torturing the people who lived above them by scaring them and being cruel. And especially to the descendants of the king, which is the princess that we just read about. In the process of time, they had got a king and a government of their own, whose chief business, beyond their own simple affairs, was to devise trouble for their neighbors. It will now be pretty evident why the little princess had never seen the sky at night. They were much too afraid of the goblins to let her out of the house then, even in company with ever so many attendants, and they had good reason, as we shall see by and by. Chapter 2. The Princess Loses Herself. I have said the Princess Irene was about 8 years old when my story begins, and this is how it begins. One very wet day, when the mountain was covered with mist, which was constantly gathering itself together into raindrops and pouring down on the roofs of the great old house, whence it fell in a fringe of water from the eaves all around it, the princess could not, of course, go out. She got very tired, so tired that even her toys could no longer amuse her. You would wonder at that if I had time to describe to you one half of the toys she had. But then you wouldn't have the toys themselves, and that makes all the difference. You can't get tired of a thing before you have it. It was a picture, though, worth seeing. The princess sitting in the nursery with the sky ceiling over her head, at a great table covered with her toys, If the artist would like to draw this, I should advise him not to meddle with the toys. I am afraid of attempting to describe them, and I think he had better not try to draw them. He had better not. He can do 1,000 things I can't, but I don't think he could draw those toys. So the author is trying to say there are so many toys that it would be impossible to draw all of them or to even attempt to draw them. That's how many toys this princess had, and yet she was still bored. But think of it. She has no siblings, no friends. She's surrounded by adults who constantly care for her, make sure that she's safe. She's got kind of a boring life. No man could better make the princess herself than he could, though. Leaning with her back bowed into the back of the chair, her head hanging down, and her hands in her lap, very miserable, as she would say herself, not even knowing what she would like, except to go out and get very wet, catch a particularly nice cold, and have to go to bed and take gruel. The next moment after you see her sitting there, her nurse goes out of the room. Even that is a change, and the princess wakes up a little and looks about her. Then she tumbles off her chair and runs out of the door, not the same door the nurse went out of, but one that opened at the foot of a curious old stair of worm-eaten oak, which looked as if never anyone had set foot upon it. She had once before been up 6 steps, and that was sufficient reason, in such a day, for trying to find out what was at the top of it. So now that her nurse is gone, she wants to explore a little bit. Up and up she ran, such a long way it seemed to her, till she came to the top of the 3rd flight. There she found the landing was the end of a long passage. Into this she ran. It was full of doors on each side. There were so many that she did not care to open any, but ran to the end, where she turned into another passage also full of doors. When she had turned twice more and still saw doors and only doors about her, she began to get frightened. It was so silent. And all those doors must hide rooms with nobody in them. That was dreadful. Also, the rain made a great trampling noise on the roof. She turned and started at full speed, her little footsteps echoing through the sounds of the rain, back for the stairs in her safe nursery. So she thought, but she had lost herself long ago. It doesn't follow that she was lost, though, because she had lost herself. She ran for some distance, turned several times, and then began to be afraid. Very soon she was sure that she had lost the way back. Rooms everywhere and no stair. Her little heart beat as fast as her little feet ran, and a lump of tears was growing in her throat. But she was too eager and perhaps too frightened to cry for some time. At last her hope failed her. Nothing but passages and doors everywhere. She threw herself on the floor and began to wail and cry. So she'd been lost for a while and can't find her way back. She did not cry long, however, for she was as brave as could be expected of a princess of her age. After a good cry, she got up and brushed the dust from her frock. Oh, what old dust it was! Then she wiped her eyes with her hands, for princesses don't always have handkerchiefs in their pockets, any more than some other little girls I know of. Next, like a true princess, she resolved on going wisely to work to find her way back. She would walk through the passages and look in every direction for the stairs. This she did, but without success. She went over the same ground again and again without knowing it, for the passages and doors were all alike. At last, in a corner, through a half-open door, she did see a stair. But alas, it went the wrong way. Instead of going down, it went up. Frightened as she was, however, she could not help wishing to see where yet farther the stair could lead. It was very narrow and so steep that she went up like a 4-legged creature on her hands and feet. So even though she's scared, she's still curious. So she crawled up the stairs almost like a ladder because it was so steep. So she's still lost, she's still upset, and she still has no idea where she is. And she's getting farther and farther from where she began. That is the end of chapter 2. We will read chapter 3 tomorrow. I think 3 and 4, and it's called The Princess and We Shall See Who. And then chapter 4 is called When the Nurse Thought of It. All right, have fun doing your activity.